So hi, I want to welcome you to our first in a series of brown bags on teaching with technology. I'm very honored today to introduce Dr. Erik Meyer, who was the Education Day Teaching with Technology Award winner. Everybody right now should have themselves on mute, and you do have the capability to unmute yourself if necessary. We'd like questions inside the chat box so Dr. Meyer can take a look at them. I'm going to throw it over to Dr. Marcellus and then to introduce Dr. Meyer further, give us some more information, and then she'll throw it over to Dr. Meyer. Please note, we do have somebody, if you're having Zoom issues, they are titled as Zoom questions, LI. If you see them on your screen, that's Dr. Linda McCauley, and she'll be handling any challenges that anybody has. All righty, let me go ahead and send it over to Dr. Marcellus.
Thanks. So those of you who came, thank you for coming. And the invitation had a link to a video. Hope everyone got a chance to watch it because it has a lot of good information. It's 50 minutes long, but it is, in case you haven't already looked at it, it's structured, it's broken up into shorter segments, and there's a table of contents that allows you to jump to the different parts. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, we'll talk a little bit about some of what was in those videos later on today, but you can also look at the videos later, at your leisure. Dr. Meyer has posted the link in the chat, so you can get that if you'd like, and it's also in the meeting announcement for this session. So what we're going to do today is essentially just a Q&A based on that video and some of the other work that Dr. Meyer has done with the neuroscience module. So I've got a few questions, but as Dr. Kurzweil said, you're welcome to type questions in the chat if you come up with any as we're talking. So I will go ahead and kick it off with the first question. Dr. Meyer, why did you end up submitting a video for this session rather than doing a live presentation?
That's a really good question. And it lines up with what we discovered in the neuroscience module, which is fit for purpose. Right, so the video that I sent you guys isn't a high-level Bloom's objective. I'm not asking you guys to necessarily apply anything. You know, at the end, I'm hoping that faculty can see different examples and get some basic skills for how to use Panopto or screen capture or PowerPoint voiceover capture. So you don't need me, and we don't necessarily need a discussion to achieve those objectives. So this brown bag is a brown bag, right? Like, you know, Dr. Bodig is an international educator. Like, it's super intimidating to have him in here and think I'm gonna, drop some knowledge in his direction. So he's gonna bring something to the table. I've got Team ETI here, right? You guys helped execute everything we did this year. So maybe I'm saying, oh man, this is really how things work well. And you guys are like, well, actually that was really complicated and this would have been better. So, I'm hoping as we move up in the objectives and we're building knowledge together, that we can leverage a synchronous conversation, and everything else you guys could watch whenever, wherever, asynchronously.
Okay, great, thanks. So that kind of leads into the next question I had, which was in the video, you said that content intended for synchronous viewing really doesn't capture well for asynchronous viewing. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. So just yesterday, I was giving a lecture and someone said, hey, can we record this and turn it into something live? I said, please don't, because my microphone is attached to this uniform. So who knows what the recording is going to sound like? Is it going to sound like this? And oftentimes my faculty will speak with their microphone. So they'll point at stuff with their microphone, which makes the volume oscillate terribly. Or even right now. So we're recording this, and if I stop suddenly because I'm looking at Brad's nonverbals or I'm reading the text chain, later on, that won't make any sense. There'll be no context for it. So even when we do the Amygdala conference, this big international trauma conference, we pre-record the faculty from New Zealand to create a really nice longitudinal product, something that people can go to after. We do the live session, the synchronous session. They're still in New Zealand. People are wherever. And then later when people want access to it, we show them the pre-recorded content, because it just captures so much better when it's fit for purpose. When we've designed something to stand alone asynchronously versus we've designed something to function synchronously.
Okay, great. Have you found that there are any things that do work okay in both synchronous or asynchronous and asynchronous?
Thinking through timing. When I present live, I'll often have like a big transition slide, like literally a slide that says part 2. And I will move across the stage, or I'll point to something, or I'll use a nonverbal, and the whole audience will know we are pivoting in the conversation. So keeping those intact, even though there is no audience, and coming up with different ways of doing that, color coding things, using your voice, really emphasizing like, okay, everyone, we just finished section 1. What did we cover? Here's a reminder. Now we're moving on to section 2. To keep people oriented is really helpful. And honestly, so like in the video that I shared with you all, we use chapter headings to break things up, and incorporating some of that strategy of, actually having something on the left-hand side of the slide that is static. It never changes until we switch a chapter, which is the way a lot of online courses work, right? Like when you're doing your annual equal opportunity training, it goes down on the left-hand side as you work your way through the modules. Having the same thing for a live PowerPoint presentation is really helpful. So it's interesting to see what things overlap and what things don't. The other thing that doesn't overlap that I just remembered are my nonverbal. So I hate to point with a laser pointer. I really like to move over to the screen and like bang on the screen and be like, see this right here? Watch out for this guy. This enzyme is going to mess up everything or whatever. But obviously none of that gets captured online. So that's another one that I have to keep track of.
Great. So talking a little bit more about the video, again, for those of you who haven't seen it, I want to make sure you have a sense of what's coming up so you can, if you do get a chance to look at it, you can. But in the video, you do a nice job of laying out the types of assessments that can be used for lower level and higher level objectives based on Bloom's taxonomy. You noted that for lower level objectives, you can use quiz tools that are built into Panopto and other software to allow students to self-assess and receive feedback. And then for the higher level objectives, you indicated it was harder to do automated checking and feedback. How did you all handle receiving work from all the students in the module in neuroscience, especially after COVID when you couldn't have the small groups?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you're talking about the light bulb picture in the presentation. Yes. So if you guys are scrolling through that video trying to figure out what we're talking about, it's the rainbow light bulb. So this is where we discovered that Sakai really doesn't do a lot of the things that we would like it to do. And we just ignored it previously because we didn't need it to do that. We were teaching live and we could get away with it. But for example, like Sakai has a discussion group feature, but most online discussion groups sync to your email, right? So if you're in, the Pinewood Derby discussion group and someone asks a question, you can reply to their question via email and it will post that to the board and then everyone else can see it. And it's really easy to have a conversation. Whereas Sakai, you see that something happened and then you click on it and it takes you to the SSO and then it takes you to Sakai, but not actually to that conversation. It just takes you to your Sakai home screen. So now you have to remember which course is it and where is that discussion board, and really no one uses the discussion board that way. Same with quizzes. And this actually isn't Sakai's fault. It's, and this is probably one of the biggest things with IT is that you really have to treat talking to IT professionals like talking to patients. Assume nothing. Assume when they say server, your idea of what a server is wrong or completely different, right? So patients frequently come in and they're like, I have really bad tummy pain. And you're like, well, where's your tummy pain? It's like, all up here. Okay, that's not where I was trained the stomach is, but it doesn't really matter, right? So we thought Sakai couldn't handle tests or quizzes, but really it's the USUS servers. Sakai is housed on the servers at USUS, whereas the Google platform is housed on Google servers off campus. So we were trying to have these live tests and quizzes in our module, and Sakai would just completely crash, which is really stressful for the students. So the way that we did it during COVID, where COVID started 2 days into the module, so we didn't have time to do long-term solutions, was we had to use a wide variety of platforms. So Panopto, off campus, it's secure. It uses the same SSO that the Google platform uses, so you can control who has access to what very easily and intuitively. The Google Forms works really, really well. It's very stable. You can turn a Google form into a Google quiz. It's a simple button in the settings. And if you turn it into a quiz, you can force it to shut down at a certain time. So we would send an email out through Sakai, because you can timestamp when an email goes out. The Sakai servers have about a 3-minute lag. So we'd have the email timestamped for 12:57. At 1300, the students would get the email, and at 1320, the Google form would shut down, and they would do the quiz based off of a link in the Google form that took them to Panopto to watch a video. So we had to use a lot of different platforms and basically leverage what that platform did well. The really tricky part was doing it in such a way that the students didn't know how many platforms were being used, right? Because the students hate that. They hate when they have to log in, the left side of their screen is this thing and the right side of their screen is this thing, and what's the username for the other thing. So wherever possible, we used either an automatic login, or in Panopto and in Google Forms, you can share something with anyone at ucsys.edu who has the link. And those links are, 50 characters long, so no one's hacking your link. So, Sakai sent an email with a link embedded in it. All the students had to do was click it. That took them to the Google form. The Google form had a link in it that took them to the Panopto video. They click it, it takes them there. So for them, as a user, it seems like a smooth interface. But for us on the back end, we're using all sorts of different platforms and tying them together to achieve the mission. Same with, so Maggie Swanberg, awesome educator, neurologist in the module. She didn't want to lose the neuro exam. We can't teach the neuro exam during COVID, so she had the students use their phones to videotape themselves doing the neuro exam on their roommate or their spouse or whoever it is they were potting with. And then they uploaded those to a Google Drive, because we couldn't upload that many videos to Sakai. It couldn't handle it. These were all like 1 or 2 gig videos. But Google Drive handled it no problem. We shared a different folder with different ranges of the alphabet. Then those folders got shared with the faculty who reviewed all the videos. Super easy. And then, and because everything is linked back to your Gmail, the faculty just emailed whoever submitted the video and said, here's your feedback. This is what I do differently next time, because it was all formative. So that's how we used a bunch of different platforms.
So all the students did get feedback on those who submitted videos.
Yeah, and this is one of those things where, 2 years ago, before COVID, Dr. Mears and I moved all of our lecture content online, which was about half of our contact hours. It was about 80 hours out of our 177. And the faculty thought that we were, devil worshippers, destroying the university, military medicine's going down the tube, they're going to close UCUs because we're pre-recording these lectures. It's just terrible. And now everyone's recognizing, like, there's a lot of amazing things you can do. So we've been teaching the neuro exam in small groups for decades. It's so difficult to give every student the feedback they need. When it was all videos, the faculty logged in, and in the same amount of time, they could go, hey, student so-and-so, at minute 133, you thought you were checking the biceps tendon, but it's actually over this way. You need to move your thumb laterally if you're really going to check that reflex. And the student can go see their video and be like, oh, that is exactly what they're talking about. And here is my feedback. And we've seen that in so many different ways. We embedded a video evaluation or a lecture evaluation tool at the end of every single Panopto video. We had 5,000 evaluations. So people are always talking about, oh, the students are overwhelmed with evaluations and they're burnt out. Not when it's fit for purpose, not when it's, hey, I just finished this video, here's my 3 questions, blah, 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 feedback. In fact, we had to come up with a crazy algorithm to wade through 5,000 evals so we could figure out which lecture and which faculty it went to. That's great. For foundations this year, teaching the interview, they want us to go over to Walter Reed, but Dr. Wynn and I have said, like, no way, we're going to do this all in Google Hangouts or all in Zoom. And we use screen capture, so Command-Shift-5, and we record the student talking to the SP and say, okay, what are you doing here? You're introducing yourself, setting an agenda. What could you do differently? Again, we've been doing this course since I was a medical student. As a medical student, you walk out of the exam room sweating, terrified, and your faculty member's like, how do you think your intro went? Like, I have no idea. That was 20 minutes ago. So now we can really help give specific feedback with these new tools. Brad asked a great question regarding the Sakai crashing with the quizzes. So that's a good one. So quizzes that had high resolution images, so the histology and the pathology quizzes, were notorious for crashing earlier, but all quizzes crash, especially when you're trying to do 177 students in the same 10, 15, 30-minute window. And it's two things. One, it has to do with the bandwidth of the servers at UCS. And the IT folks at UCS will say, you know, we spend 97% of our budget trying to keep what we have going, which is like crazy. If you talk to any other university, they spend about 20% of their budget keeping what you've got working, and the other 80% innovating and putting new platforms online. The other issue, and it's beyond my expertise, but it has to do with how Sakai saves quiz performance. So if you have a 5-question quiz and the student does question 1, it uploads something and then downloads something. And then they do 2 and it re-uploads everything and re-uploads everything back. So it's a lot more traffic, where the Google form, and don't quote me on this, I'm not an IT person, but the Google form basically allows the student to navigate all the way to the end of the quiz. And when they submit the quiz at the end, it sends everything to the server. So it's much more efficient than the way Sakai operates, but I have no idea why Sakai is coded that way.
Well, Brad, we'll make a note of that. Is it time for ESU to move the Sakai server into the cloud? Don't know.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know how questions like that are answered, but I will tell you, so Google Classroom is a really cool online teaching platform. And we basically have all the tools because we have the Google Suite, right? Google Classroom just leverages Google Forms, Google Calendar, Google Docs, Google Sheets into a cohesive learning platform. So this year, Combat Medical Skills, or MEM 101, is going to pilot Google Classroom. They're actively doing it right now, with the hopes that they can demonstrate this actually works a whole lot better. And since as a university, we're already paying for it through the Google Suite, let's just move to that. Now, the big issue obviously is Sakai. And my guess to your question, Brad, about why is Sakai on a UC server, Sakai is available through the DHA. So if you're at any NTF, you can get to Sakai, which is really important for our clerkship students and clerkship faculty. Whereas DHA, not the DoD, DHA has blocked Google at all the MTFs. So really, I'll have to go check. I'm going to be at Walter Reed this afternoon. I'll go check on that because that would be a huge problem.
So Danny asked about why we bought into Sakai for platforms versus Canvas. That analysis actually happened back in 2008. There was a committee, we were on Blackboard at the time, and there was a committee that actually looked at Canvas, looked at Sakai, and looked at other options that were available, and each of the schools had a representative, and in the end, Sakai was chosen as the overall, from a needs assessment perspective, winner of this. Moving Sakai to the cloud requires a lot of government approvals. So there is, anything in the cloud needs to be FedRAMP approved, and FedRAMP approval costs a lot of money. So Sakai probably will not spend, and I don't know the exact number, I just know it's a lot and I've heard it, that type of money to make themselves FedRAMP approved. Those are smaller businesses that are running kind of those cloud-based pieces.
And I think that's where this conversation is really helpful as we as faculty, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but if faculty are afraid of online teaching, then they don't really engage the platform, and the platform is good enough because I don't want to push it any further. As we start to really dive into this and say, you know what, I do need embedded quiz questions in all my lectures. And I do need them to upload, large content back to me. I need them to be able to upload videos of them interviewing standardized patients or real patients. Then it's going to push that dialogue on, no, we really do need this because it's impairing our curriculum. As Dr. Pangaro says, it goes from a nice to have to a must have.
Okay. So again, is anyone's welcome to ask any questions they have in the chat. I know Dr. Boettiger has already. Danny Ellis did. So keep the questions coming until I will keep on asking my questions as well. So the next question, you're talking about kind of the importance of getting faculty members engaged and involved, and you talked a little bit about the history of neuroscience. So you've been working with faculty members on recording videos for neuroscience for the last couple of years. Can you talk about what faculty members have found to be the most difficult part of the recording process for folks who might be trying to get started?
Yeah, so one of it is fear, just not knowing what it's going to look like or how is it going to work. Once they get into the green room or once they use Panopto and they capture their own content, I'd say the majority of the faculty, all ages, all levels of professorship, come back pretty happy. They're excited about the fact that they can edit out their gaps and really hone their product to be just the way they want. They usually come back and ask questions like, can I share this with my national organization? You bet. If you feel you have a quality product now that you want to share with your peer group, not just medical students, or you can use it for other things, that's fantastic. I think trust is a big part of it. When you move online, a lot of the things that we would never allow to happen live start to slide. That can happen with the students. And we can, throw our hands up in the air and be like, well, it's an IT issue. But if it happens, so like if we tell a faculty member to go to the green room and record their video, and then their video doesn't work, or it doesn't record, or the link doesn't go out on time, and the students don't see their video before the synchronous small group, so they're not prepared for the small group. That's a huge betrayal of trust, right? And we would never do that in a live setting, right? Like we would never be like, hey, esteemed colleague, 3 months from now at 2 p.m, can you come to lecture hall C2? And then no one's there, right? Oh, didn't I tell you? Yeah, there's a luncheon. Like if that happens, it's a big deal. There's lots of apologies and we do everything possible to make amends and to make sure it doesn't happen again. But I find in the online space, people are very comfortable being like, well, like, is there an end to that sentence? Because you totally just stood me up, or my content didn't go. Like I'm trying to execute a curriculum. And if you're new to it, it's terrifying. But I think it's no more terrifying than anything else, right? Like when you're moving into residency, you're moving into your outpatient year. It's like, wait a minute, I'm in this room by myself with this patient. Like, how do I make sure they come back for a follow-up appointment? Like the first time you do that, it seems really, really scary, but then you realize there are systems in place and there are ways that you can ensure things work. Same when you get to use and, someone says, can you give a lecture next week? On what? For who? Where? How? Like, it is terrifying the first time, but there are questions you can ask, processes you can engage in. So, for example, we quintuple check everything with the faculty. This is what's going out. This is the lecture you sent us. Here's the link. We have at least 3 levels of redundancy. So ETI records everything we do in the green room, but I also have an 8 terabyte hard drive that just stores all the raw footage so that if anything ever crashes, we've got a backup. Or if someone comes back and wants to re-record and it crashed or got deleted because we don't have incident space at the university, we can go back to that. We also put a copy of every single lecture on Google Drive because Google Drive is stored off campus. So 2 years ago, when someone with a backhoe decided to cut the IT line to use, 2 clicks later, the curriculum kept going because it just pivoted to the Google Drive and the students didn't care where they were getting it from. So it's little things like that. And the same is true for the students. Like if the students are super anxious, they're incredibly anxious because they need to learn so much content that if their links don't work, they don't trust us anymore. They don't, and not trusting us isn't just like, oh, well, they really don't know how to teach online. It extends to they don't know how to teach, period. And I'm not going to go to Sakai, like I'm going to go to Pathoma or First Aid or MedEd Online or whatever, because those are fee-for-service educational products that like always work. So those are the things that we're up against. And my recommendation to anyone is to watch out for people who are like, well, those links just don't work sometimes. Like, don't put up with that, because we would never put up with that live. That was a really long answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. We got some comments I want to look at in the chat. Kelly said, unfortunately, I too, and I'm going to read these out so that we have them for the recording. Unfortunately, too, I think there is hesitation to invest the time and energy learning the technology when it seems that it doesn't work or that it's going to change. And I think that's a little tangential to what Dr. Meyer was saying, but it is in terms of learning management systems. I think certainly the goal of ETI is to think about, in terms of content, what kind of content changes and what pieces will change and won't change. We try to find ways to build things that are cross-platform. So if platforms change, right now we have Panopto, which is a useful tool, and that's going to stick around. That's not going to change it.
I totally appreciate what Kelly's saying, because we experience this in the hospitals all the time. You need to go learn this new system and then it doesn't roll out, or you need to start coding patients this way and then just kidding, we're not going to do it that way. So when someone says, hey, I want you to come, totally change the way that you've been doing this thing that works, right? I think in education, there's a lot of momentum. If something works by any definition, it's hard to get people to change it. If they're going to put that time and energy into it, they want to know their new effort will be successful. And that's where it's on us to pilot everything. And that's what we did in the neuroscience module. Before we rolled anything out to the faculty at large, Dr. Mears and I were in the green room. We were recording our content. We were putting it on the website. We were sending it to 4 or 5 students. Access this from home, access this from the hospital. Tell us what works and what doesn't work. So that by the time we rolled out to the faculty, everything was streamlined. Like a good example would be embedding questions. We weren't totally certain we could train all the faculty on Panopto, like on how to embed questions in time. So we turned it into a Google form and then got some admin help to translate the Google form into the Panopto questions. So it's little things like that of kind of respecting faculty time and burden that go a long way in the execution.
So Eric, I would add to that too, that you are hitting a really important point when it comes to using any technology, new to somebody or old, for those creative ideas, for those really innovative steps that you're going to take to, try and figure out what works for you, that pilot phase, that beta phase, so that you really get information back and you can hone it, should be a continuous process. You want to constantly look at what you're doing and how you can improve it over time, as well as how you can integrate it with new things. And I think it's important that people not think you're once and done. I know you made a lot of changes to things, Eric, in the neuroscience module after your original recordings to the second, to the third, and now we're in the next phase for improvement. And it's an important aspect to keep in mind that, just like your lectures are probably not once and done, neither is using technology in any facet.
Totally agree. Danny Alice, you asked a great question about Sakai. My recommendation is to play with it. So what I've done is, I've done 2 things. One was markedly less different. University of Michigan, they use Sakai, and you can see what their Sakai platform looks like, but they're using a different version. And even if they're using the same version, ours is locked down to meet security standards that others don't have to meet. But it's really helpful to see, like, what do other people do? How do other people build their courses? I think another thing that's been more successful at use for me has been to reach out to people who have really good Sakai courses. So emailing ETI and asking, do you have some gold standard Sakai sites to see what's possible is helpful. Emailing the HPE faculty. So there's at USUS, there's a health professions education program where you can get a certificate or a degree in teaching. So it's usus.edu HPE. Any of the faculty in there, I mean, their degrees are in teaching. So their Sakai sites are somewhat uniformly really, really good. They have as a program, they have decided this is the standard for all their courses. So you can see what that looks like. That's really helpful. And then just playing around with it. So, you can email Sakai help and ask for, a fake Sakai site, like a personal Sakai site. And what I found helpful is just to try building different pages. The worst thing about especially use it. It's like 20 page where it's very, here's week 1, and when you go to week 1, you can see everything. It's, well, here's Monday, here's Monday at 9 a.m. Here's sure. And then if you go to the next lecture, up Monday, and then go to the next lecture. That's really what seems to impair people from perusing the content. But there are ways around that. You can make your Sakai pages really, really long, so that, here's the Monday page and it's got everything. The issue there is if students or learners are looking at it on a phone, you get the longer it is to scroll, the less likely they are to get to the bottom. But again, the more we play with it as faculty, the more we figure out how this thing works, the better feedback we're going to be able to give to the folks who can make change.
All right, and kind of tied to what you've been talking a lot about the preparation and what you've done. So we know you like to play around with technology, and you have a lot of experience, and you've done what you can to make things work for the faculty that teach for you. But you do have a lot of faculty that jump in and teach neuroscience. Can you talk a little bit about how you help them prepare to teach online, especially last spring when they all had to do so rather quickly?
Yeah, definitely. So you're gonna hear me use this phrase way too much. I fit for purpose. So my faculty who are teaching small groups, they don't need to build a Sakai site. They don't need to talk about online curriculum design versus live curriculum design. They really just need, what are some best practices for online instructional design, or even just classroom management, honestly. And then they need to practice with it. So what we did is we did all of our faculty development in a way that was identical to the way the curriculum would be executed. So if the faculty were going to be doing an asynchronous Google Hangout, then the faculty development was a synchronous Google Hangout. So the first time they were experiencing it, they were logging in as students and seeing like, oh, okay, I click on this and now my mic doesn't work. And that way, when the students logged in and had similar problems, they saw them coming and they could watch us teach them and see the best practices we use. So for example, using the chat, you can have a more dynamic conversation. People can throw something in the chat at any time. Or if you want to keep something for the thing I love to do, hey guys, we're going to start in about 5 minutes. While you're waiting, please throw your goal for the session over in the chat. And then at the very end of the session, I can scroll to the top of the chat and say, okay, Bob, you were really hoping we'd do this. And Sally, you were really hoping we'd do this. Did we accomplish what we were teaching the faculty? Here are the teaching points. That hasn't changed. How can you deliver it in an online space? And we're going to teach you how to do that using the exact same tools you'll be teaching with. Other helpful things were pre-recording kind of exemplars. So if we had the two faculty who designed the small group setting having a mental model supposed to look like them running it, and then share that video with the faculty. And that's one of we have lots of those from this year because we had to move so much online. And I'm hoping we keep those as a database of faculty development. So 2 years from now, we have a new faculty member, we can say, here, watch Dr. So-and-so running this small group. This is really a great way of doing it. I think hanging out afterwards is the other helpful thing, right? So at the end of the lecture, there's always a gaggle who hang out at the front of the room. And frequently in Zoom meetings, we're all just desperate to end them so that we can go to the next one or run to the bathroom before the next one. When you're doing faculty development, give yourself an extra half hour after the end and just offer to be there. Like, I'm just going to hang out in this room until you're all gone and I'll answer questions that you have. I'm always amazed that I'd say like 20% of the students or faculty have questions that they didn't feel comfortable answering.
So 2 points, Eric, that I want to emphasize. First of all, the play idea. I always tell people that are thinking about engaging in a new technology to spend time playing with it. Don't think of it as trying to learn a new tool, think about it as trying to play with a new toy, because it puts you in a different mindset. And a mindset about using a new piece of technology is really, really important for the get-go. And also, I want to reemphasize that spending time with people both before and after the presentation really does set up a basis for community. I usually tell people that, you know, the actual meeting is 50 minutes, and then there's 10 minutes at the end where I can talk to people. You don't want to have to use the whole time just to lecture. You want to give people that time to have the one-on-one with you. And also to add to that, you also want to think about time where community can just be set up. Every interaction with your students doesn't have to be about a lesson. You can have an open forum where you're available a couple of times a week to engage with your students, and say it's almost like your office hours piece. But say, hey, Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'm going to be at this link. Come on in, let's talk. Let me answer questions. They may use it, they may not, but it sets up a better sense of that live environment that they may be used to, and also allows you to work with them just like you would in the hall if they walked by you and asked a question.
Okay, thanks. And just for the recording, Danny agreed that pre-meeting time is a great idea. Another question, you've kind of touched on this at different points, but I want to focus on it a little bit. So again, you did have to transition online very rapidly, and you had already done a lot of work putting a lot of content online, but you suddenly had to put everything online. What were you focusing on as you began that transition for everything to online delivery?
Yeah, so with COVID, we were in triage mode, and we felt really blessed that half of our content was pre-recorded in a high quality way. Every module could have shown last year's content, but it's a live recording. So all the issues I talked about, a synchronous session versus an asynchronous session. So every module was in the same boat where half their content was pre-recorded, if you will. But moving anatomy labs and small group sessions, simulated sessions online, we were really in triage. So we found out that we were going to be shutting down on a Wednesday, and Friday was the last day we had the students together, and Monday was the first small group session that had to be moved online. So or grandparents who at the time lived in New York State or somewhere in the Eastern Seaboard, which is where the first surge of the pandemic was, they were worried about whether or not they were going to be able to get through medical school. A lot of other medical schools were shutting down. So I think the combat disaster psychiatrist in me was like, we need to do psych first aid. We need to make sure that everyone knows that they're going to be okay, that we've got their backs, that we're not going to abandon them. So we really tried to avoid anything that was risky. So like the small group session on Monday, we weren't ready to get, the small groups were a basic scientist and a clinical scientist, and we had 20 small groups. So we weren't ready for 40 faculty to be logging into an online platform to do a synchronous session yet. So Dr. Nugent and I just sat down, recorded it cold, did a little bit of editing, and shot it out, right? So that's not where we want things to be moving forward long-term. It'll be a good fact dev video, but we triaged that. That gave us time to focus on things further down the road. And we quickly started making some big decisions. Like we were not going to use Adobe Connect, which is what the school kept pushing on us because it's not stable. You have to download an app, you have to download software, it doesn't load, different computers handle it differently. Zoom wasn't an option yet. Everything was with Google Hangouts. Google Hangouts, the use super easy. Is it the sexiest thing out there? No, but it works. It always works, basically. And so we knew that students would go to the right place, click on the right link, and be connected with the right faculty. So again, was our first priority. Second priority was we don't want to lose everything. You know, like, yeah, we could turn everything into a video, but a video doesn't accomplish the higher level objectives of the synchronous sessions. So how do we keep those high level objectives? So we had to triage one small group into a video lecture, and we had to triage one simulated session, just got canceled until months later when the Sim Center had figured out a way to get SPs online. But otherwise, we moved everything into an online setting, like a Google Hangout, or we had students record themselves doing the physical exam, or we did pro sections in the ATL and took an iPhone around and videotaped everything so that students could see all the dissections, and then did a sign up where 4 students at a time could be in the whole ATL. It's a huge room, right? To go look at the pro sections. That's really how we prioritize what had to happen.
So I have one last question. Again, anyone else is welcome to join in if they have any additional questions before we let Dr. Meyer go back and share some PBJs with his kids maybe. But the last one, we've been talking a lot about technology, and that's an important element of all this online stuff that we're doing. But the theme of this session is teaching with technology. So I want to take a slight turn and start thinking a little bit about the teaching side of it. So can you talk a little bit about the process of transitioning neuroscience, not necessarily on the technology side, but from the teaching side? How did that affect your philosophical approach to teaching?
That's a good question. Well, definitely having the students trust us as faculty became way more apparent as a priority. I don't think I would have said it's not important beforehand, but I didn't recognize how important it was. So really making sure that links worked, websites were updated, objectives lined up, video handout, Sakai site. So, and we saw by doing that student utilization of our content exploded, went through the roof. They stopped using outside resources because everything we were doing was so tight. So that was a big change. I think recognizing that it's not just moving things online, but it's leveraging those online tools. You know, like Poll Everywhere is not something that has to be used online. You can use it in a live lecture. And what we had been doing for every Friday, we do a flipped classroom where we take all the lectures they watched online, turn them into 4 or 5 clinical vignettes. And within each clinical vignette, there are 3 or 4 questions. And the way we did it in previous years was, well, here's the question, think, pair, share. Okay, now raise your hand to share what you think the answer is. So it's super low stakes, but a lot of students didn't want to raise their hands and, very anxious about getting it wrong. And then we tell them the right answer, and the faculty member who gave the lecture that answered the question would be there for 3 minutes to show the 1 slide or 2 slides that explained the answer to that one question. Well, moving that online made it a whole lot easier to schedule all the faculty, because getting 20 faculty in the same room at the same time was difficult. But Poll Everywhere really told us where the students were at, because it was anonymous, if you will. So we could see like, oh, you're not all just raising your hand because the smart kid over in the front did. A bunch of you really aren't tracking this yet. And now we can slow down and have a conversation. Same with the embedded quiz questions. So of our 42 video lectures, we embedded quiz questions in about 62% of them. And most of the lectures had 1 question for every 15 to 20 minutes. The results of those quizzes are immediate. So instead of finding out that my students didn't understand what I was trying to say in week 2's lecture, 4 weeks later at the midterm, or heaven forbid, 8 weeks later at the final exam, and then a week after that, because we finally get the summative exam results back, the day after the lecture was scheduled, I can see that students aren't tracking. Maybe it's because it's a bad quiz question, or I taught it wrong, or it's confusing, but it doesn't matter. That Friday, we would do a top 5 questions where we would go through all the quiz questions from all the video lectures of the week and say, okay, this is where you guys really seem to be struggling. Either we're not teaching it well, or it's more confusing, or whatever, but let's hit it again. So, on the exam performance uncurved went up to, I think our average was an 82. So that's just phenomenal that everyone is tracking along and getting that much content on average. So those are the little things that it would be really difficult to do that live. I think back to when I was a high school teacher and I had an exit ticket. So if you wanted to leave Mr. Meyer's physics classroom, you had to answer 3 questions on a quarter sheet of paper. That took me forever. Every day I'd have to grade all those things. And then the next day, give all the students feedback on how they did. My wife, also an elementary school teacher, was much smarter. She did an exit ticket, but then you traded with your classmate and graded each other's and passed them back. So her classroom management is vastly superior to my own. But it's just difficult to do live. It's so much more intuitive in an online setting.
Okay.
But I'd like to keep some of those things moving forward, even when COVID is done.
Yeah. No, it's nice that there's definitely some. I know you've talked about the tracking, the assessment, the just knowing in real time where your students are is a big benefit of technology. And as you're thinking about trying to teach them, not just teach to the test, but make sure they know get what you're saying. That's a really important element. Well, that was my last question. I'm not seeing any others in the chat. Any last call for any questions anyone has before we let Dr. Meyer go?
I'm going to put the schedule in for the rest of the sessions that are going to be available, just so everybody has the dates and the people who will be presenting. I also wanted to let you know this was sent out on the listservs for seminars and research. I will probably do a faculty all next time, but you all have the dates and time now too, so you can mark your calendars. The Zoom meeting link will be the same.
Well, thank you all for the great questions, and thank you ETI for the invitation. This was super fun. It's always nice to see what people are thinking about at the university.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, stay safe.
Thanks.